The doctor called it a routine surgery, but I woke up feeling hollowed out, like a part of my soul had been carved away. It took me a week to discover my husband had paid him to sterilize me, not to avoid having children, but to hide his own. My name is Isabella Montoya, and I'm 33 years old. To everyone who saw us, my husband Caleb and I were the living embodiment of the Charleston dream. We lived in a historic house south of Broad, with a sprawling veranda and gas lanterns that flickered to life each evening, casting a golden glow on the cobblestone. He was a Vanderbilt, a name that carried the weight of old Southern money and unspoken power. He promised me a dynasty, a family to fill the echoing halls of our beautiful home, children whose laughter would become the next layer of history in a house that had seen generations come and go. What he gave me instead was a secret signature on a medical form, a surgeon's scalpel moving in the dark, and a future of profound, deafening silence. This is the story of how the man who swore to protect me paid to have my future stolen from me, and how I took it back. Our life was a carefully curated masterpiece of Southern elegance. We hosted garden parties where the scent of jasmine and gardenia hung heavy in the humid air, the clinking of iced tea glasses, a gentle symphony against the murmur of polite conversation. Caleb was always the perfect host, his arm possessively around my waist, his smile as bright and practiced as the silver he inherited. I was a historical preservationist, a career that perfectly complemented our life. I spent my days restoring the beauty of the past, believing I was building a future on a foundation of unshakable trust. I had no reason to believe otherwise. Caleb was my rock, the calm center of my world. So when the pain hit me, sharp and blinding, during our annual azalea bloom brunch, I collapsed into his arms without a second thought. Appendicitis, they said. A sudden, violent inflammation. As they wheeled me into the pristine, private hospital that his family practically owned, Caleb was the picture of a devoted husband. His face was etched with worry. He held my hand. He silenced the doctors with a single, authoritative glance. "Take care of her," he'd said, his voice low and firm, "whatever it takes." I remember the blur of white coats and the sterile scent of antiseptic. I remember Caleb leaning down to kiss my forehead just before the anesthesia pulled me under. "You just rest, my love," he whispered, his voice smooth as aged bourbon. "I've got everything under control. I'll sign whatever they need." I drifted into unconsciousness, wrapped in the warmth of those words, in the absolute certainty of his love. That was my last moment of peace. Waking up was a slow, foggy crawl back to reality. The first thing I felt wasn't the sharp sting of an incision, but a deep, hollow ache in my core, a phantom pain that radiated through my entire being. It was a feeling of violation, a profound sense of loss I couldn't articulate. The doctors and nurses were cheerful, telling me the surgery was a complete success. Caleb sat by my bed, holding a bouquet of magnolias, his smile never faltering. He told me I was brave. He told me I'd be back on my feet in no time. But every time he looked at me, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Not concern, but a chilling, triumphant finality. He had built us this perfect life, this beautiful gilded cage, and on the outside, everything still sparkled. But I was beginning to realize that I was inside it, alone, and the lock had just clicked shut. We all have those parts of our lives we keep hidden, the rooms with the doors firmly closed. If you've ever felt like you were living in a beautiful house but knew something was deeply wrong behind one of those doors, just hit that like button as a quiet signal. A little light in the dark to let others know they aren't alone. The physical pain was manageable, a dull throb that medication could soothe. But it was the other feeling, a cold, creeping certainty that an essential part of me had been stolen while I slept, that kept me wide awake under the sterile fluorescent lights. My body was telling me a story that no one else in that room was willing to acknowledge, and I knew, with a terror that was just beginning to bloom, that my fight was only just beginning. The next 48 hours in that hospital room were a masterclass in quiet gaslighting. Caleb was a constant, suffocating presence. He read novels to me, spoon-fed me bland broth, and regaled the nurses with charming stories about our travels. Dr. Abernathy, the surgeon whose family had been tending to the Vanderbilts for 3 generations, would pop in on his rounds. When I tried to describe the deep, aching emptiness inside me, he'd offer a condescending smile. "That's perfectly normal, Isabella," he'd say, patting my hand. The body plays tricks on the mind after a major surgery. You're just sensitive." The word sensitive was wielded like a weapon, a gentle dismissal designed to make me feel small, irrational. Every concern I had was smoothed over, every question deflected with medical jargon and paternalistic reassurance. I was living in a fog, not from the medication, but from the coordinated effort of everyone around me to convince me that my own intuition was a lie. It was the morning of my discharge when the fog finally began to clear. Caleb was at the nursing station, signing the final papers with the confident flourish of a man who owned the world. A young nurse I hadn't seen before came in to take my final vitals. Her name tag read Chloe. She was barely in her 20s, with wide, nervous eyes that refused to meet mine. She moved with a skittish energy, her hands trembling slightly as she checked my blood pressure. I could feel her anxiety radiating off her, a stark contrast to the practiced calm of the rest of the staff. The air in the room was thick with unspoken words. She finished her checks just as Caleb's voice boomed from the hallway, laughing at some joke with another doctor. Chloe flinched. In that split second, she made a decision that would alter the course of my entire life. She fumbled with the chart in her hands, letting it slip to the floor. As she bent down to retrieve the scattered papers, out of sight from the door for a precious few seconds, she pressed a tiny, tightly folded piece of paper into my palm, which was resting by my side. Her fingers were cold and clammy. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible, filled with a mixture of terror and pity. Then she was gone. My hand closed around the note, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. It felt like a live coal in my palm. That small, folded piece of paper felt heavier than a ton of bricks. It was the truth, hiding in plain sight. Have you ever had a moment like that? A gut feeling confirmed by a stranger's quick word? A sign that just completely changed the direction you were heading? If you have, just type the word clarity in the comments below. I want to see how many of us have been saved by a moment of unexpected truth. Caleb walked back in, smiling, telling me the car was waiting. I smiled back, a hollow, brittle thing that felt like it would shatter my face. I tucked the note into the waistband of my sweatpants, the paper crinkling against my skin, a secret screaming to be heard. The drive home was surreal. We passed through the sun-drenched, picturesque streets of Charleston, past the Rainbow Row and the horse-drawn carriages, landmarks of a life that no longer felt like mine. Caleb put his hand on my knee, talking about a trip to Europe we should take once I'd recovered. Every word, every touch, now felt like a lie. The beautiful historic house we returned to no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like the scene of a crime, and I was the only one who knew a crime had been committed. That evening, after Caleb had gone to sleep, I locked myself in the master bathroom. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely unfold the note. Under the soft light of a vanity sconce, I read the hurried, slanted handwriting. It wasn't signed. It just said, "They did more than the appendectomy. Request your full surgical report and the operative notes. Trust no one. Not your doctor. Not him." The last two words were underlined twice. The breath left my body in a silent scream. It wasn't paranoia. It wasn't sensitivity. It was real. Looking at my reflection in the vast antique mirror, I no longer saw the happy, trusting wife of Caleb Vanderbilt. I saw a stranger, a woman who had been gutted in more ways than one, a woman who had just been handed a declaration of war, and I knew with chilling certainty what my first move had to be. I had to get that report. The next morning, I moved through our sun-drenched kitchen like a ghost. I made coffee, the familiar aroma now smelling like ash. I pretended to read a book on the veranda while Caleb took his morning calls. Every movement was an act, every polite smile a mask for the glacial fury that was solidifying in my veins. He was watching me. I could feel it. He was studying my recovery, checking to see if his perfect crime had left any visible seams. I gave him nothing. Around 10, I told him I needed to get out of the house, that the walls were closing in. "Just a short drive," I said, my voice deliberately frail. "I won't be long." The look of concern he gave me was so convincing it was nauseating. "Of course, my love," he said. "Just be careful." I wasn't careful. I was methodical. I drove directly to the hospital, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I walked not to the gleaming main entrance, but to the administrative wing in the back, a place of beige walls and buzzing fluorescent lights. At the medical records window, a stern-faced woman looked at me over her glasses. "I'm here to request a complete copy of my medical file," I said, my voice even and clear. She tapped at her keyboard. "Dr. Abernathy will have to authorize the release," she said dismissively. "We'll send the request to his office." I had anticipated this. "Actually," I said, leaning in slightly, "under HIPAA law, I am legally entitled to my own records, and I'm requesting them directly from this department right now. If you'd like, I can wait while you consult with the hospital's legal counsel." I held her gaze. The shift in her expression was immediate. The gatekeeper crumbled, replaced by a bureaucrat. 45 minutes later, I walked out with a thick manila envelope that felt as heavy as a tombstone. I didn't open it until I was back in the sterile anonymity of my car. With the engine off and the Charleston humidity fogging the windows, I tore the seal. I sifted through the pages of nurses' notes and billing codes until I found it, the operative report. The language was cold, clinical, a world away from the emotional violence it described. I saw the words, appendectomy, successful, and then a new paragraph. Given the patient's documented history of familial gynecological complications, and with spousal consent in lieu of preoperative patient availability, a prophylactic bilateral salpingectomy was deemed prudent to mitigate future health risks. Bilateral salpingectomy. I typed the words into my phone with trembling fingers. The removal of both fallopian tubes. A permanent, irreversible sterilization. And there, at the back of the file, was the consent form. A dozen signatures from nurses and anesthesiologists, and then, at the bottom, a line for authorization. Printed neatly next to it, Caleb Vanderbilt. His signature was confident, decisive. The stroke of a pen that had ended a bloodline. The drive home was a blur of rage. When I walked through the front door, he was in the living room, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey. He smiled when he saw me. "There you are." I was getting worried. I didn't say a word. I walked to the antique coffee table between us and dropped the envelope. The papers spilled across the polished mahogany. His smile didn't vanish. It tightened. He looked at the papers, then back at me, his face transforming into a mask of profound, heartbreaking sorrow. "Oh, Isabella," he sighed, his voice dripping with disappointment. "You went behind my back." The performance that followed was worthy of an Oscar. He didn't yell. He didn't deny it. He lamented it. He sat down, the concerned husband, and spoke in soft, reasonable tones. "Darling, I know this is a shock, but you're not thinking clearly. We have to be honest with ourselves." He started weaving his web, pulling threads from conversations we'd had years ago. He reminded me of the time I'd expressed anxiety about childbirth, the time I'd confessed a fear of not being a good mother. He took these tiny, normal moments of doubt and twisted them into a portrait of a woman terrified of having children, a woman who was begging to be saved from her own desires. "You were in so much pain, my love," he said, his eyes welling with crocodile tears. "You told me you weren't sure you could go through with it, that you were scared. That was a lie. A monstrous, soul-crushing lie. I made the decision you weren't brave enough to make," he said, his voice dropping to a sanctimonious whisper. "I did it to protect you. I did it to protect us. I freed you from that pressure." He was telling me he had mutilated my body as an act of love. The audacity of it, the sheer sociopathic brilliance of it, left me speechless. He was invalidating my past, my present, my future, my very mind, all while positioning himself as my savior. I stood there for I don't know how long after he left the room, trembling in the suffocating silence of our perfect life. His words echoed in the air, a poisonous vapor designed to disorient and disable. "I did it for us. I freed you. You weren't brave enough." It was a psychological masterpiece, a lie so complete that it threatened to become my reality. For a terrifying moment, I felt myself slipping. Did I once say that? Was I secretly afraid? He had planted a seed of doubt, and it was starting to take root in the fractured soil of my shock. I felt a wave of nausea and stumbled out of the house, grabbing my keys and driving without a destination. I ended up at Waterfront Park, staring out at the vast expanse of the harbor, the grand arches of the Ravenel Bridge looking like the ribs of some long-dead beast. I felt so utterly, terrifyingly alone. There was only one person in the world who could pull me back from this ledge. My fingers, still shaking, dialed her number. "Sam," I sobbed into the phone when she answered, my voice a ragged whisper. "Sam, he's making me think I'm crazy." I poured out the whole sordid story, the hollow pain, the nurse's note, the clinical words on the report, and finally, Caleb's twisted, insane justification. I told her how he'd framed my mutilation as an act of mercy. There was a dead silence on the other end of the line, a silence so heavy it felt like it was absorbing all the sound in the universe. For a heart-stopping second, I feared that she too would think it was unbelievable, that I had lost my mind. Then, her voice came through the speaker, and it was not soft or pitiful. It was a low, guttural sound of pure venom. "That son of a bitch," she hissed. "Listen to me, Isabella. You listen to me right now. You are not crazy. Do not, for 1 second, let that monster convince you that you are." Her words were like a splash of ice water, shocking me back to life. But he said I was scared, that I told him I didn't want— Bullshit. Sam cut me off, her voice sharp and clear. Absolute bullshit. Do you remember 2 months ago, on the flight back from the preservation conference in Atlanta? We spent an hour on my laptop looking up Latin names because you said you wanted something classic. Do you remember last month you sent me a picture of that ridiculously expensive vintage baby crib from that antique store on King Street? I still have the texts, Bella. We have a message thread a mile long about turning your upstairs office into a nursery. He is lying. He is a monster, and we are going to make him pay. Hearing her say it, hearing her present cold, hard evidence of my own desires, was the anchor my spinning world needed. That one phone call was a lifeline. It was the anchor that stopped my world from spinning into madness. We all need that one person who believes us without question. If you have someone like that in your life, or if you are that person for someone else, just type "lifeline" in the comments. Let's fill this space with a tribute to the anchors who keep us sane. After I had stopped crying, Sam's tone shifted. The supportive friend was replaced by the sharp-witted paralegal. "Okay, let's think," she said, her voice now crisp and strategic. "A man like Caleb Vanderbilt, from a family like that, doesn't do something this extreme without an extreme motive. This isn't about your anxieties, Bella. That's the cover story he wants you to believe. For men like him, it's never about feelings. It's always about one of 3 things: money, power, or legacy. He isn't protecting you. He's protecting something else, something far more valuable to him than you are. His business is all clean, I'm sure. These guys are too smart for that." There was a pause, and I could practically hear the gears turning in her head. It's not in his office. It's at home. The real secrets, the family secrets, they're in the family safe. The prenups, the wills, the trust documents. That's where you need to look. I hung up the phone, the tears gone, replaced by a cold, lucid resolve. Sam was right. This wasn't a crime of passion or misguided love. This was a calculated business decision. My body, my future, had been a line item in a transaction I knew nothing about. I looked out across the water, at the grand, historic houses lining the Battery, homes of the Charleston aristocracy. I used to see beauty and history. Now, I saw a row of gilded cages, full of secrets. My home was one of them. And I had a new mission. I was going to find the key. Returning to that house after the call with Sam was like stepping onto a stage. The play was the same, but I now knew my lines were part of a tragedy, not a romance. I became an observer in my own life, a spy in my own home. I watched Caleb, not as a wife, but as a profiler studying a subject. I watched the way he meticulously arranged his cufflinks in the morning, the way he checked the stock market with a detached, predatory stillness. I studied his routines, the predictable rhythm of his days, waiting for the window I needed. It came, as Sam predicted it might, with the unwavering precision of aristocratic habit, his Thursday afternoon golf game at the ocean course. It was a 4-hour ritual, as sacred and inviolable as Sunday service. As I watched his Mercedes disappear down our long, oak-lined driveway, the house settled into a deep, oppressive silence, broken only by the solemn ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. It was time. His study was his sanctuary, a room of dark mahogany, worn leather, and the lingering scent of whiskey and entitlement. A massive, severe portrait of his great-grandfather, The man who'd built the family fortune stared down at me from over the fireplace. I had always hated it. Now, it felt like I was being watched by the ghost of the lie itself. Sam was right. There was no laptop open, no scattered papers. There was only order, control, and somewhere, a safe. I ran my hands along the wood-paneled walls, searching for a seam, a hidden latch. I found it behind a framed map of colonial Charleston. A section of the wall swung inward, revealing the cold gray steel of a combination safe. My heart hammered. The combination. I tried the obvious ones first. Our anniversary, my birthday, his. Nothing. The digital keypad flashed red, a silent rebuke. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to think like him. What was the most important date in Caleb's universe? Not to us, but to him. And then it hit me. A memory from a stuffy family dinner years ago, his father, droning on about their legacy. September 17th, 1888, he'd said, raising his glass. The day Cornelius Vanderbilt opened our first shipping office on the docks. The day it all began. It was an arrogant, self-important detail I had filed away and forgotten. My fingers flew across the keypad. 9, 1, 7, 1, 8, 8, 8. The light flashed green, and with a heavy, satisfying thunk, the lock disengaged. The contents were as cold and orderly as the man himself. Stacks of bond certificates, deeds to properties I didn't even know we owned, and a series of thick, sealed envelopes. My eyes landed on one marked with Caleb's full name, followed by personal and confidential. My hands were shaking as I broke the seal. Inside was a medical file from a specialist in Atlanta, dated 3 years before we were even married. The terminology was dense, but I found the summary page. Diagnosis: congenital bilateral absence of the vas deferens. Prognosis: azoospermia. 0 viable sperm count, medically sterile. The air left my lungs. The man who had just last week been talking about baby names with me, the man who had built our future on the promise of a family, he couldn't have children. He had never been able to have children. The shock was a physical blow, but I didn't have time for it. My eyes scanned the other documents. I found a heavy, leather-bound portfolio. It was the last will and testament of his late father. I frantically flipped through the dense pages of legalese, my mind racing, the pieces of a puzzle I never knew existed starting to slam into place. And then I found it. Article 4, Section 3. The Inheritance Clause. It read, "The principal sum of the Vanderbilt Family Trust, herein valued at a sum no less than 50 million United States dollars, $50 million, shall be disbursed in full to my son, Caleb Theron Vanderbilt, upon the verifiable birth of a legitimate, biological heir to carry on the family name." The words practically vibrated on the page. Biological heir. It wasn't about my anxieties. It wasn't a twisted act of love. It wasn't even about his affair, if he was having one. It was a $50 million business transaction. Sterilizing me was his insurance policy. It was risk management. It ensured I could never get pregnant by another man and expose his secret. It bought him time to figure out how to produce a fake heir to secure his fortune. My body hadn't just been violated, it had been leveraged. I sat on the floor of my husband's secret temple, surrounded by the architecture of his grand deception. The grief was still there, a deep, primal wound. But now, it was overshadowed by a rage, so pure and cold it felt like a superpower. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had built our entire life, our marriage, our future, on a foundation of absolute fraud. I carefully photographed the key documents with my phone, my movements precise and deliberate. I placed everything back in the safe, spun the lock, and closed the panel. When Caleb came home a few hours later, smelling of cut grass and privilege, I was on the veranda, reading a book, The Perfect Wife in the Perfect House. But the woman he had left that morning was gone forever. In her place was an executioner. And I had just found my axe. The days that followed were a quiet, nerve-shredding performance. I was Ophelia, playing the part of the fragile, recovering wife, while my mind was a whirlwind of cold, hard calculation. I brought Caleb his coffee in the morning. I discussed dinner party menus. I feigned weariness from my difficult recovery. All the while, the images I had taken from the safe burned on my phone, a constant reminder of the $50 million lie that formed the bedrock of our marriage. I knew the why now, his infertility, the bloodline clause that was the motive. But I didn't have the how. How was he planning to produce a fake heir? How was he funding this elaborate deception while the family trust remained just out of his reach? The answers weren't going to be on paper. I knew I had to get inside his digital world. My chance came on a Tuesday. He had a board meeting in Atlanta that would keep him away overnight. The moment his car cleared the driveway, I went back into his study. His personal laptop was a fortress I knew I couldn't breach. But the sleek iMac in the corner, the one we supposedly shared for household accounts, was a potential vulnerability. He used it occasionally, and his guard might be lower. I sat in his leather chair and booted it up, password protected. I tried the usual suspects: our anniversary, my name, the name of his beloved hunting dog, Beauregard. Access denied. I leaned back, trying to think like the narcissist I now knew he was. What did he truly value? What object reflected his self-image? My eyes scanned the room and landed on a framed photo on his desk. It was of him, leaning against his vintage 1968 Porsche 911. He was insufferably proud of that car. I typed in the model number, PORSCHE911. The screen unlocked. I was in. I spent hours sifting through a digital life that was as meticulously organized and devoid of emotion as his physical one. Most of it was legitimate stock portfolios, property management files, links to market analyses. I was about to give up when I found it. A synced cloud drive folder, tucked away, named simply Project Nightingale. It was password protected, of course. On a hunch, I typed in the Porsche password again. It opened, and my blood ran cold. It was a complete, beautifully rendered business proposal. The project was a hyper-exclusive, luxury boutique hotel on a private stretch of Kiowa Island. There were architectural blueprints, profit and loss projections that seemed almost too good to be true, and marketing materials that spoke of unparalleled low-country elegance. It was brilliant. It was also, I suspected, entirely fake. I dug deeper, opening a subfolder labeled Corporate. Inside were the incorporation documents for a new LLC, Palmetto Legacy Partners. My training as a historical preservationist meant I'd spent hundreds of hours poring over old deeds and legal documents. My eyes knew how to scan for the fine print, and I found the loopholes. The company was registered to a P.O. box in North Charleston. It had been founded only 3 months prior, and the operating agreement listed only one managing partner with total, unilateral, and unlimited control over all company funds and assets, Caleb Vanderbilt. It was a corporate structure designed not for partnership, but for plunder. The final piece of the puzzle was in a folder labeled Funding. There was only one file inside, a scanned bank statement. It confirmed a single massive wire transfer into the Palmetto Legacy Partners account, dated just 2 months ago. The amount was staggering, $2.5 million. $2,500,000. My mind reeled. This was it. This was his seed money. This was the slush fund he was using to maintain his lifestyle, to grease palms, to fund whatever scheme he was hatching to unlock the real prize. This was the capital that powered his entire fraudulent life. My eyes scanned to the top of the statement, to the source of the funds, looking for the name of a bank or a corporation. But it wasn't a corporation. It was a person. The wire had come from the personal savings account of a woman I had never heard of. Her name was Claire Vance. I stared at that name on the screen for a long, long time. Claire Vance. Who was she? An old family friend? A gullible business acquaintance? Why would anyone in their right mind transfer their entire life savings to a man for a project that, on paper, was a legal ghost? The rage I felt over my own betrayal suddenly felt less lonely. It expanded, making room for this unknown woman. Caleb wasn't just my traitor. He was a predator, and he had another victim. My mission, which began as a quest for personal justice, had just become something more. It was no longer just about the future he had stolen from me. It was about the one he was clearly in the process of stealing from her. I had to find out who Claire Vance was. For the next 2 days, the name Claire Vance was a ghost that haunted my every waking moment. It was a whisper in the quiet hum of the air conditioner. a shadow I saw in the periphery of every room. I went through the motions of my life, replying to emails, discussing paint swatches for a client's drawing room, smiling at Caleb across the dinner table, but my mind was elsewhere, circling those two words. Who was she? And how had Caleb, a man obsessed with the purity of his bloodline and the pristine image of his family, entangled himself with a total stranger in a scheme that risked everything? I knew social media was a long shot. The Charleston elite were notoriously private, but I had to start somewhere. Late that night, long after Caleb's steady breathing filled the bedroom, I sat in the dark, the pale blue light of my phone illuminating my face. I typed her name into a search bar. Her profile was private, but her profile picture was public. A stunningly beautiful woman in her late 20s, with bright, ambitious eyes and a confident smile, posing on a sailboat with the Charleston harbor sparkling behind her. It was the kind of picture that screamed success and happiness. I almost dismissed it until my eyes caught a detail in the background. Standing next to her, beaming with pride, was an older man whose face I knew instantly. It was Arthur Vance. My breath caught in my throat. Arthur Vance had been Caleb's mentor, a legendary self-made investor who had taken a young, cocky Caleb under his wing years ago. Arthur was the man Caleb always quoted at dinner parties, the ghost he was always trying to impress. He had passed away from a sudden heart attack just over a year ago. I remember the funeral. I remember Caleb giving a eulogy, so moving it brought the entire congregation to tears. He'd spoken of Arthur's integrity, his brilliance, his generosity. And I remember him turning to Arthur's grieving, heartbroken daughter and saying, his voice thick with emotion, "I will always look out for you, Claire. I promise." It was her. Claire Vance was Arthur Vance's daughter, and the $2.5 million wasn't just a random investment. It was her inheritance. It was the money her father had worked his entire life to build, a legacy of a good man, entrusted to his most prized protege, and Caleb, my husband, was systematically stealing it from her. He was not just a fraudster, he was a grave robber, desecrating the memory of the man who had built him. He betrayed his own mentor, the person who gave him his start. It makes you question everything about family and loyalty, doesn't it? The roles were assigned, the expectations placed on us. Let me know. Were you ever the scapegoat in your family or the golden child? Type scapegoat if you were always the one getting blamed, or star if you were the one they could do no wrong. I'm curious to see the balance in here. The horror of it was so profound, so absolute, that I almost stopped digging, but I had to know the full extent of the sickness. I started searching for tagged photos, public posts, anything that could connect her to Caleb now. I found it on the Instagram profile of a mutual acquaintance, a gallery owner. It was a photo from a charity regatta a few months back. There, in the background of a group shot, almost out of focus, were Caleb and Claire. They were standing close, too close. His hand was resting on the small of her back. It was an intimate, possessive gesture I knew all too well. My stomach churned. I kept digging, falling deeper into the digital rabbit hole. I found a picture Claire had posted of a new diamond tennis bracelet, a delicate, beautiful thing. My heart stopped. I recognized it. I had seen the receipt for it from a private jeweler a few weeks ago when sorting through our mail. I had assumed it was a surprise for our upcoming anniversary. The final, undeniable proof came from a travel blog, a post about a luxury resort in the Grenadines. The blogger had posted a scenic shot from a restaurant overlooking the ocean. And there, sitting at a secluded corner table, their heads bent close together in intimate conversation, were Caleb and Claire. It was them, there was no doubt. The timeline clicked into place. The affair, the financial fraud, the promise to his dying mentor, my surgery, it was all one monstrous, intertwined web of deception. He was sleeping with his dead mentor's daughter, stealing her inheritance, all while having his own wife surgically sterilized to protect the family fortune he couldn't rightfully claim. The full portrait of the man I married was finally complete. He wasn't just a liar and a cheat. He was a sociopath of the highest order, a man with a moral compass so broken it didn't even point south, and in that moment, something inside me shifted. The jealousy, the heartbreak of the affair, it was still there, a dull, throbbing pain, but it was eclipsed by a strange, cold clarity. Claire Vance wasn't my rival. She wasn't the enemy. She was just the next victim on his list. And my enemy's other victim, I realized with a sudden, chilling certainty, might just be my most powerful weapon. For a long time, I just sat there in the darkness of my bedroom, the phone screen casting long, dancing shadows on the wall. The jealousy was a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth, a primal wound that screamed at the image of Caleb's hand on another woman's back. It would have been so easy to let that feeling consume me, to make this about the affair, to paint Claire Vance as the villain, the homewrecker. That was the script society expected, the one Caleb was probably counting on. He would anticipate tears, screaming matches, a messy, emotional confrontation between two women fighting over him. He would see it as a predictable, manageable chaos. But the rage that was coursing through me now was something colder, something more ancient than jealousy. It was the rage of a chess player who finally seized the entire board. The affair wasn't the point. The bracelet, the secret trips, they were just symptoms of the disease. The disease itself was Caleb's insatiable, pathological need for control, for validation, for that $50 million inheritance. Claire wasn't a partner in his scheme. She was a resource to be exploited, just like me. He had leveraged my body for time and secrecy. He was leveraging her inheritance for capital and credibility. We were two different assets in the same cold, ruthless portfolio. The $2.5 million he had stolen from her wasn't just a side hustle. It was the engine of his entire operation. It was the money he was using to wine and dine the lawyers who would help him fake an heir. The money to pay off people like Dr. Abernathy. The money to maintain the illusion of success and power that was essential to his identity. Without that money, his entire house of cards would collapse. It was in that moment of chilling clarity that the plan began to form, not as a coherent thought, but as a visceral, undeniable instinct. My pain was a weapon. My knowledge was a weapon. But the most powerful weapon of all? It wasn't mine. It belonged to Claire Vance. That $2.5 million was the silver bullet. It was the one vulnerability in Caleb's otherwise impenetrable fortress of old money and legal firewalls. He had insulated himself from me with a prenup written by a team of sharks, and he had insulated himself from the truth with a conspiracy of silence from his society friends. But he couldn't insulate himself from the rightful owner of his seed capital demanding her money back. He had built his entire scheme on the assumption that his two victims would never, ever talk to each other. He had counted on the timeless narrative of wife versus mistress. He had underestimated both of us. My revenge would not be a messy, emotional explosion. It would be a quiet, systematic demolition. I wouldn't just expose him. I would bankrupt him. I wouldn't just reveal his lies. I would use his own intricate scheme as the instrument of his downfall. He wanted to protect his family's legacy? I would use the money he stole from his dead mentor's daughter to burn that legacy to the ground. The thought was terrifying. It meant reaching out to the other woman, the woman whose face was now inextricably linked with my deepest heartbreak. It meant exposing myself, my pain, my humiliation, to the one person who had every reason to hate me. It was a gamble of epic proportions. She could laugh in my face. She could run straight to Caleb, revealing my entire hand, and giving him time to cover his tracks, to disappear with her money, to paint me as the hysterical, vengeful wife he had always claimed I was. The risks were immense, but the potential reward, the vision of Caleb's perfect world crumbling around him, live and in public, was too potent to ignore. I looked at the picture of Claire again, at her bright, confident smile. She thought she was building a future with a charming, successful man. She had no idea she was just a stepping stone. I had to warn her. Not just for my sake, but for hers. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, and in this case, the other woman wasn't my enemy. She was my only possible ally. My war for justice had just found its financial backer. The riskiest move of my life wasn't breaking into a safe. It was typing out a single, 38-word message. My thumb hovered over the send button for a full minute, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I wasn't just contacting my husband's mistress. I was betting my entire plan on the hope that a woman I'd never met, a woman who was sleeping with my husband, would believe me over him. The message was concise, professional, and devoid of emotion. Claire, this is Isabella Vanderbilt. I know this is unorthodox, but I need to speak with you urgently regarding your investment with Palmetto Legacy Partners. It is in your vital financial interest that we speak before you talk to Caleb. Please trust me on this. I hit send, my breath held tight in my chest. The reply came in less than an hour, a testament to her efficiency and, I suspected, her curiosity. Tomorrow, 4 p.m. The Camellia Tea Room on Queen Street. Come alone. The tea room was a sanctuary of old Charleston charm, with delicate floral wallpaper and the quiet clink of silver on porcelain. It was the kind of place women went to whisper gossip over scones and clotted cream. It felt like a surreal setting for the declaration of war I was about to propose. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a secluded table in the corner, my back to the wall. I ordered a pot of Earl Grey tea that I knew I wouldn't be able to drink. When Claire walked in, she was even more striking in person. She moved with an easy, athletic grace, dressed in a sharp, impeccably tailored blazer that screamed confidence. She slid off her sunglasses, and her intelligent, calculating eyes sized me up instantly. There was no pity in her gaze, only a cool, wary disdain. "Well," she said, her voice crisp as she sat down, not bothering with pleasantries. "Here I am. I assume this isn't about the interest rates on my investment. If you've come to make a scene, you can save your breath." I had prepared for this. I had rehearsed 100 different openings in my mind. But in that moment, I knew that words were useless. She was armed against my words, my emotions. She was not armed against the facts. I met her gaze and held it. "I'm not here to make a scene, Claire. I'm here to stop you from losing $2.5 million. I slid a slim, unmarked folder across the table. "I'm here because of this." Her perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched in suspicion, but she opened it. The first page was a copy of the Palmetto Legacy Partners LLC filing, and I saw her eyes scan the document. I watched her finger trace down to the address, the P.O. box, and then to the section on managing partners, where Caleb's name stood alone. Her expression didn't change, but a flicker of doubt appeared in her eyes. I pushed the second document forward. The bank statement. Her bank statement. With the single, massive transfer. "That company is an empty shell," I said, my voice low and steady, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. "It has no assets, no history, and no other investors. He can dissolve it and walk away with every penny of your money tomorrow, and there is nothing you can do about it." She looked from the paper to my face, her mind clearly racing, trying to find the lie, the angle. "He told me. He said the other partners wanted to remain anonymous. He said my father would have wanted this for me." Her voice had lost its edge, replaced by a defensive tremor. "Your father," I said, my voice softening slightly, "was a brilliant man. He would have never let you sign on to a deal where you had zero legal control. Caleb counted on you trusting him more than you trusted your own instincts." The final blow came as I slid the last document towards her, a copy of the authorization for my surgery. Her eyes scanned the page, her brow furrowed in confusion, until they landed on the description of the procedure and Caleb's signature at the bottom. What is this?" she whispered. "That," I said, my voice turning to ice, "is what he does to the woman he shares a bed with when she is no longer a necessary part of his financial plan." I watched the color drain from her face. I saw the precise moment the truth hit her, a physical impact, as if she'd been struck. The defiant mistress vanished, replaced by a horrified, betrayed young woman. Her hands began to tremble. In that moment, we weren't a wife and a mistress. We were just two women staring at the wreckage caused by the same man. It's a strange and powerful thing, finding an ally in the last place you'd ever expect. Have you ever had to team up with someone you thought was your rival? You don't have to share the story, just use one word in the comments to describe how it felt. Unexpected, powerful, justice. I want to see them. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, unadulterated fury. She looked up from the papers, her gaze meeting mine, and for the first time, we saw each other not as rivals but as survivors. "That bastard," she whispered, her voice shaking with rage. "He used my father's memory. He took everything. He took my future," I replied, my voice quiet but firm. "And he's about to take your father's legacy. The only question is, what are we going to do about it?" The Camellia Tea Room, with its soft light and the gentle clinking of porcelain, became the unlikely war room for our revolution. The initial shock that had shattered Claire's composure quickly crystallized into something far more dangerous, a cold, methodical rage that mirrored my own. The tears of fury were wiped away with a rough, impatient gesture, and the devastated young woman was replaced by the daughter of Arthur Vance, a shrewd, intelligent investor who had just discovered she'd been played for a fool. For the first time, she looked at me not as the wife of her lover, but as a potential business partner in the most hostile of takeovers. "Tell me everything," she said, her voice now steady and devoid of its earlier tremor. "Every lie, every secret you found. I want to know the full balance sheet of his treachery." So I told her. I laid out the whole sordid story, starting with the $50 million inheritance and the bloodline clause. I explained the medical impossibility of his fatherhood, the cold, calculated reason behind my sterilization. As I spoke, I watched her absorb the information, not with emotional horror, but with the detached analysis of a strategist. She wasn't just listening, she was processing, connecting dots, assessing damages. When I finished, she was silent for a long time, staring out the window at the tourists passing by on Queen Street, their happy, oblivious faces a world away from the cold reality inside our booth. "The Kiowa Island Project," she said finally, her voice flat. "Project Nightingale. It's all fake, isn't it?" I simply nodded. "I should have known," she continued, a bitter self-recrimination in her tone. "The projections were too perfect. The returns were too high. My father always told me, if it looks too good to be true, it's a lie designed to take your money." I let my affection for Caleb cloud my judgment. I let him use my father's memory against me. "He uses everyone's emotions against them," I said. "It's his greatest tool. He used my love and trust, and he used your grief and loyalty." The alliance between us was forged in that moment, not with a handshake, but with a shared, unspoken understanding. We were two sides of the same counterfeit coin. I was the wife he'd kept to maintain the illusion of a legitimate family life, the vessel for a legacy he could never produce. She was the mistress he'd seduced to finance the illusion of his business prowess. Separately, we were victims. Together, we were a threat. "So we have him on financial fraud with my money," she said, her mind already shifting to tactics. "And you have him on assault and battery. At the very least, malpractice for the doctor. But a quiet legal battle isn't enough. He'll bury us in paperwork. He'll use his family's army of lawyers to drag this out for years, paint us as scorned, hysterical women. We can't just win. We have to annihilate him. Publicly." It was as if she had reached into my mind and plucked out my own nascent, unformed thoughts. "A public execution," I whispered, the words tasting like victory. Claire's lips curved into a wry, mirthless smile. "Exactly. He's obsessed with his image, with the Vanderbilt name, with the respect of the Charleston elite. We don't just take his money, we take his name." The plan began to take shape right there, on the back of a napkin from the tea room. Our two skill sets, once so different, now meshed perfectly. She, the investor, understood the flow of money, the legal triggers, the precise moment to freeze an account to cause maximum damage. I, the preservationist, understood optics, history, and the power of a perfectly staged reveal. We would let him continue building his house of cards, let him climb all the way to the top, right up until the moment he was about to declare victory. And then, at his moment of ultimate triumph, we would pull the foundation out from under him in front of the whole world. "He's planning to officially launch Project Nightingale at the annual Vanderbilt Family Foundation Gala," she said, her eyes gleaming with a new, dangerous light. "It's in 3 weeks. It's the biggest society event of the year. He's going to be on stage, in front of his entire family, announcing his triumphant new venture, funded by my money. And that," I said, leaning forward, "our conspiracy now sealed, is where we'll be too." We left the tea room not as enemies, but as co-conspirators, two generals with a shared target and a map to his destruction. The 3 weeks leading up to the Vanderbilt Family Foundation Gala were the most surreal of my life. By day, I was the devoted wife, meticulously overseeing my own recovery, helping Caleb choose between a Tom Ford or an Armani tuxedo, and nodding along as he rehearsed the key points of his triumphant speech. I was a ghost in my own home, my smile a carefully constructed mask, my every touch a calculated lie. By night, my house became a clandestine command center. Claire and I, with the help of a shrewd piranha of a lawyer Sam had found for us in Atlanta, worked with a silent, furious efficiency. We were a 2-woman army plotting a coup. Claire spent hours on encrypted calls with her bank's fraud division, lining up the legal firepower to freeze the LLC's assets on our command. I spent my time studying the gala's floor plans and program schedule, mapping out the timing of our strike down to the second. We were leaving nothing to chance. The night of the gala was a quintessential Charleston affair. It was held at the South Carolina Society Hall, a grand antebellum building whose very walls seemed to whisper secrets of old money and buried scandals. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the high ceilings, casting a warm, forgiving light on the city's elite. The air was thick, with the scent of magnolia blossoms and Chanel No. 5. This was Caleb's world, the natural habitat of the predator I now knew him to be. He moved through the crowd with an effortless grace, his hand possessively on my back, accepting congratulations for a project that was nothing more than a fiction. He was radiant, untouchable, the golden son of the Vanderbilt dynasty on the precipice of his greatest triumph, and I stood beside him, a silent, smiling time bomb. I wore a floor-length emerald green gown, a color I chose for its association with poison. He just told me I looked beautiful. Claire arrived an hour after us, making an entrance that turned heads. She was a vision in crimson, a stark, bold statement in a sea of polite pastels. She played her part to perfection, that of the proud, supportive friend and investor. She exchanged air kisses with society wives and laughed at the jokes of ancient banking scions. At one point, our eyes met across the crowded, glittering ballroom. It was a fleeting, almost imperceptible exchange, but it was enough. It was the silent acknowledgement of two soldiers in enemy territory, a final confirmation that all systems were go. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but my hands were steady. The mask was holding. Walking into that ballroom on his arm, smiling as his friends and family praised him, was the most difficult and terrifying performance of my life. Every part of me wanted to scream the truth right there, but I knew I had to play my part until the very last second. Have you ever had to put on a brave face, smiling on the outside while you were fighting a war on the inside? If you know that feeling, just type the word warrior in the comments below. Let's see how many of us there are. Finally, the moment arrived. Caleb's father, a stoic, silver-haired patriarch, took the stage to make the introductory remarks. He spoke glowingly of legacy, of family honor, of the brilliant future his son was building. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. Then he raised his glass. And so, it is with immense pride that I introduce my son, the future of the Vanderbilt name, Caleb Vanderbilt. The room erupted in thunderous applause. Caleb squeezed my hand, his eyes shining with arrogant self-satisfaction. He leaned in to kiss me. "Wish me luck," he whispered. I smiled up at him, my emerald dress shimmering under the chandeliers, and adjusted his bow tie. "Break a leg, darling," I whispered back, my voice as sweet as cyanide. He turned and walked toward the stage, basking in the spotlight, completely oblivious to the fact that he wasn't walking toward a podium. He was walking toward the gallows we had built for him. Caleb stood at the podium, bathed in a pool of warm, adoring light. He was in his element, a master of his universe. He let the applause wash over him before raising a hand for silence. "Thank you, Dad," he began, his voice resonating with a practiced, humble authority. "Thank you all. My father spoke of legacy, and that is what we are here to celebrate tonight. But a legacy isn't just about the past, it's about building a future. It's built on trust, on transparency, and on a bold vision for what's to come." Standing near the back of the ballroom, partially shielded by a marble column, I took out my phone. My screen was already open to the text thread with our lawyer. I typed a single word, "Now," and hit send. On stage, Caleb was warming to his subject. "And that is why I am so incredibly proud to announce the launch of Project Nightingale," he boomed. "A venture that will redefine luxury hospitality on the Carolina coast." He paused for effect, a charismatic smile playing on his lips. Talk is easy. That's why, tonight, as an act of our absolute commitment and total transparency, we are going to make the initial seed funding transfer to our partners, right here, right now, for all of Charleston to see. A ripple of impressed murmurs went through the crowd. This was classic Caleb, bold, confident, a showman. He gave a crisp nod to his assistant, who stood by a laptop connected to the enormous LED screen that served as the stage's backdrop. The screen, which had been displaying the Vanderbilt Foundation's crest, now prepared to display the live transaction. The room held its breath. But the screen didn't show a bank confirmation. It flickered. For a split second, it went black. Then, an image blared to life, 10 feet high, a perfect screenshot of the Palmetto Legacy Partners bank statement. The balance of $2,500,000 was clearly visible. Before the crowd could even process what they were seeing, a massive digital stamp, animated and flashing in a sickening blood red, appeared over the balance. Account frozen. Pending fraud investigation. A wave of confused whispers swept through the hall. Caleb's smile froze, cracking at the edges. He turned, his face a mask of horror, and stared at the screen as if it were a basilisk. His assistant was frantically typing, trying to regain control, but it was too late. We had locked him out. Before anyone could speak, the image on the screen changed. The bank statement was gone, replaced by a scanned medical document, blown up to a terrifying scale. My husband's name was at the top, but it was the words in the middle, circled in red, that silenced the room completely. Diagnosis: azoospermia, medically sterile. A collective, audible gasp sucked the air out of the ballroom. I saw Caleb's parents in the front row, his mother's hand flying to her mouth, his father's face turning to stone. The secret lie at the heart of their precious bloodline was now public knowledge, broadcasted at their own gala. The whispers turned to stunned, horrified silence. The final image was the kill shot. The screen changed one last time, displaying a copy of a bank transfer from Caleb's personal account. The recipient: Dr. Miles Warren. The amount: $75,000. And the memo line, written in Caleb's own arrogant hand, magnified for all to see: consulting fee, family health planning. The timeline was undeniable. The payment was dated 2 days before my appendectomy. The room didn't need a narrator. They understood. The fraud, the infertility, the bribe, it was all there, laid bare in a brutal 3-act digital execution. The flashes of society photographers' cameras, which had been capturing a triumph, now exploded in a frenzy, capturing a public crucifixion. I watched Caleb, paralyzed in the spotlight, his world shattered at his feet, live and in high definition. His empire of lies had crumbled, and the evidence of his ruin was glowing behind him like a funeral pyre. The silence in the ballroom was a physical thing, a heavy blanket that smothered every whisper, every nervous cough. Caleb stood on that stage, a marble statue in a tuxedo, the ghosts of his crimes glowing on the screen behind him. He was trapped, exposed, a king stripped bare in his own court. And in that silence, a new sound emerged. A slow, deliberate clicking of heels on the polished marble floor. The grand doors at the back of the ballroom had swung open, and through them, we walked. I was on the right, Claire was on the left. Between us was our lawyer, a sharp, formidable woman from Atlanta. We didn't rush. We walked down the central aisle with the measured, unhurried pace of an honor guard at a funeral. And in a way, it was a funeral for the Vanderbilt name. The crowd, that glittering sea of Charleston's elite, parted for us as if we were royalty, their faces a mixture of shock, awe, and morbid curiosity. We stopped at the foot of the stage, a trinity of quiet fury. I looked up at the man I had once loved, the man who had plotted my future out of existence on a sterile form. I saw the last flicker of defiance in his eyes die as he saw me and Claire standing there together. In that moment, he knew. He knew he hadn't just been outmaneuvered. He had been fundamentally misunderstood. He saw us as two separate emotional problems to be managed. He never, in his wildest, most arrogant dreams, imagined we would become a single strategic threat. Two men in dark professional suits, who had followed us in and waited by the door, now moved forward. They were court-appointed process servers. They moved with a quiet efficiency that was far more terrifying than any overt aggression. They walked up the few steps to the stage, approaching Caleb, who was still paralyzed at the podium. The first server, a tall man with a severe expression, addressed him, his voice professional and cold, easily cutting through the silence. "Mr. Caleb Vanderbilt," he stated, "you are hereby served with a civil complaint for fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and unjust enrichment." He extended a thick, legal-sized envelope. Caleb's hand, when he reached for it, was trembling. He took the document that represented the end of his financial life. The second server immediately stepped forward. "Mr. Caleb Vanderbilt," he said, his tone equally devoid of emotion, "you are hereby served with a civil lawsuit for assault, battery, and intentional infliction of emotional distress." He handed Caleb a second, equally damning envelope. The camera flashes, which had been sporadic, erupted into a blinding, continuous strobe, capturing the moment of his complete and utter ruin. From the front row, Caleb's father rose to his feet. There was no emotion on his face, only the cold, hard mask of a patriarch cutting his losses. He didn't look at his son. He looked at the head of his security detail and gave a short, sharp nod toward the stage. The message was clear. "It's over. Get him out of my sight." In that moment, Caleb lost more than his reputation. He lost his name. He was no longer the heir to a dynasty, he was just a liability, a stain to be scrubbed from the family's history. Standing there, watching his whole world burn to the ground, I didn't feel joy. I felt quiet. A deep, profound sense of justice, of the scales finally balancing after being tipped for so long. Have you ever had a moment where you finally got the justice you deserved, big or small? You don't need to share the story. But if you know that feeling of a heavy weight finally being lifted, just type "justice" in the comments. Let's see how many of us have found our peace. 2 large security guards ascended the stage, taking Caleb by the elbows. He didn't resist. He was hollowed out, a marionette with his strings cut. They escorted him off the side of the stage, away from the podium, away from the lights, away from the life he had so ruthlessly tried to protect. As he disappeared from view, my eyes met Claire's one last time. We didn't smile. We didn't need to. It wasn't a moment for celebration. It was a moment of grim, somber victory. A moment of quiet, earth-shattering power. The battle was over. The lie was dead. And we were the only ones left standing. The morning after the gala, the city of Charleston awoke to a scandal so seismic it knocked a Category 4 hurricane off the front page of the Post and Courier. The story was everywhere. It wasn't just local gossip. It was national news. Cable networks sent satellite trucks that parked outside the iron gates of the Vanderbilt estate. Financial news websites ran deep dives into the Vanderbilt deception, while tabloids screamed with headlines like "Southern Sociopath's Sick Secret and Wife" and "Mistress's Epic Takedown." The public execution we had planned had been a resounding success. The name Caleb Vanderbilt wasn't just disgraced, it was a modern-day synonym for hubris and betrayal. The empire of lies didn't just crumble, it was vaporized in a single, spectacular night. The dominoes fell with brutal, satisfying speed. Within 48 hours, the board of the investment firm where Caleb was a partner had held an emergency meeting and issued a statement announcing his immediate and permanent termination. The international partners he had been courting for his fake Kiowa Island project publicly rescinded all offers and threatened their own lawsuits. The Vanderbilt Family Foundation, in a desperate act of damage control, released a terse, 2-sentence press release, formally removing him from their board and expressing their profound disappointment. His high society friends, the ones who had clapped him on the back just nights before, suddenly had secretaries who reported they were in meetings indefinitely. His calls went unanswered. His world had shrunk to the size of a single, unanswered voicemail box. The consequences for Dr. Miles Warren were equally swift. Armed with the undeniable proof of the bribe, the South Carolina Medical Board summarily suspended his license, pending a full investigation. He was fired from the hospital his family had been affiliated with for half a century. He became a pariah in the medical community, a walking cautionary tale about what happens when you sell your ethics to the highest bidder. The legal fallout was just as severe. A week after the gala, as the media frenzy began to die down, Caleb was arrested. There was no dramatic raid on his family home. His father had already cast him out. He was quietly apprehended at a luxury hotel on the outskirts of the city. The paparazzi, tipped off by an unknown source, were there to capture the moment. The image of Caleb Vanderbilt, in a wrinkled suit, being led away in handcuffs, his face pale and drawn, became the final, ignominious epitaph of his reign. With the criminal case against Caleb rock-solid felony fraud from Claire's complaint and a mountain of evidence from our civil suits, his lawyers knew his only hope was to mitigate the damage. They reached out to my attorney with a desperate Hail Mary. They offered me an 8-figure divorce settlement, $10 million. All I had to do was drop the assault and battery charges, sign a non-disclosure agreement that would bury the full truth forever, and disappear. It was a classic Vanderbilt move, an attempt to smother justice with a mountain of cash. They thought they could buy my silence, that my crusade had been about profit all along. They still didn't understand who I was. My lawyer called me to relay the offer, her voice tinged with the weary tone of someone who'd seen it all before. I listened patiently until she was finished. My answer was simple and immediate. No. No? She asked, a hint of surprise in her voice. Isabella, this is a life-changing amount of money. Please, I said, my voice calm and clear. Relay this message to Mr. Vanderbilt's legal team. Tell them that Mr. Vanderbilt seems to believe that this was about money. He is mistaken. Tell them there is no price for my future, no number they can write on a check that will buy back my ability to have a child. Tell them my silence is not, and will never be, for sale. Hanging up the phone, I felt a profound sense of peace. I hadn't just defeated him, I had refused to become him. My victory wasn't financial, it was moral, and it was absolute. A year can feel like a lifetime, or it can pass in the blink of an eye. For me, it was both. In the 12 months that followed the gala, the chaotic, explosive demolition of my old life gave way to the slow, quiet work of building a new one. The legal battles ended not with a dramatic trial, but with the quiet, inevitable surrender of a king who had already been checkmated. Faced with irrefutable evidence and abandoned by his family, Caleb took a plea deal. He was sentenced to 15 years in a federal correctional facility for fraud and conspiracy. I read that his father, the stoic Vanderbilt patriarch, never visited him in prison, not once. Dr. Warren, stripped of his license and his reputation, was sentenced to 5 years for his part in the conspiracy and for medical battery. The empire was officially ash. The first thing I did was sell the house on Broad Street. I couldn't stand to be in it another day. I sold it, along with every piece of furniture, every silver spoon, every ghost of a life that was never really mine. I found a new place, a smaller, sun-filled apartment in the heart of the French Quarter, with a wrought iron balcony overflowing with ferns and a view of the rooftops. It was a space filled not with the weight of someone else's history, but with my own books, my own music, and for the first time in a long time, my own peace. The court eventually awarded me a substantial settlement in my civil suit, a number that made the papers, but the vindication I felt had nothing to do with the money. It had to do with the truth finally being entered into the public record. For a while, I didn't know what to do with my life. The pain of what I had lost, the children I would now only ever meet in my dreams, was a constant, low hum beneath the surface of my days. It's a scar on my soul, a piece of me that will always be missing. I had to accept that. I couldn't erase the scar, but I could choose not to let it define me. I could choose to build something on that broken ground. And I knew I couldn't be the only woman to have ever been trapped in a gilded cage, silenced by a powerful family name and a labyrinth of legal and financial control. So I used the money, every last cent of the settlement, to build a different kind of legacy. I founded the Montoya and Vance Foundation. Claire, who had recovered her entire inheritance, had moved to London to start fresh, but she insisted on being my founding partner, making a generous donation to match my own. Our bond, forged in the crucible of Caleb's betrayal, had become a quiet, powerful sisterhood. Our foundation has a unique and specific mission. We provide pro bono legal counsel and forensic accounting services to victims of what I've come to call legacy abuses, individuals who have been subjected to financial fraud, reproductive coercion, or emotional manipulation within powerful, high-net-worth families. We are a voice for the spouses, the children, the siblings who have been told for years that the family's reputation is more important than their truth. My office is bright and open, with glass walls that symbolize the transparency Caleb so despised. Every day, I speak to women who tell me stories that are painfully familiar. Just this morning, I was on a video call with a young woman from a prominent political family in Texas. Her husband controls all her finances, and she suspects he is hiding assets in anticipation of a divorce. As I listened to her, I could hear the same fear and self-doubt that I had once felt. But as she spoke, I saw the flicker of a fighting spirit in her eyes, the same one that had ignited in me a year ago. I looked around my office, at the city of Charleston bustling outside my window, a city that had almost broken me. And I smiled. The pain was still a part of my story, but it was no longer the whole story. The work, the women we help, my new purpose, that is what defines me now. I leaned into the camera and said to her, "You are in the right place. Tell me everything. We are here to listen." They say the best revenge is living well, but I've come to believe that's only half the truth. Living well is a beautiful, personal victory. But true justice, the kind that resonates and creates real change, is about something more. It's about ensuring that the person who hurt you can never hurt anyone else again. It's about taking the poison they fed you and turning it into medicine for others. Caleb's legacy, the one he was willing to destroy lives for, ended up being a 15-year prison sentence and a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. My true legacy began the day I realized my story wasn't just my own. It was a roadmap for someone else's survival. It was a light I could leave on for the next woman walking in the dark. My story, with all its ugly, painful, and ultimately triumphant details, is now finished. But as I read the comments you all have been leaving, as I see the words clarity, lifeline, and warrior fill up the screen, I am reminded that this was never just about me. It's about us. It's about the silent wars being fought behind the closed doors of beautiful homes everywhere. It's for every person who has ever been told they were crazy when they were just telling the truth. This channel, this space we're building here, is for those stories. If this journey has spoken to a truth you've had to live in silence, I want you to know that you are not silent here. The world may not always see your strength, but we do. Subscribe and join a community that understands that our greatest power is found in the stories we finally dare to tell. Thank you for listening.